my dears, and welcome back to my corner of the internet. I'm Shannon, and today I've got another book talk video to share with you guys. And today we are talking about Of the Light Over London by Julia Kelly. I originally picked this book up because I had read somewhere that fans of The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna would probably love this book. And that was enough of a selling point for me because I adored The Nightingale. Having now read both of those books, I would have to say that's probably not the most accurate comparison. While they do both take place during World War II and they both focus on women during the war effort, that's really where the similarities end. This book is a bit more of a mystery and a romance, whereas The Nightingale was so much more than that. That being said, however, don't take that as a dig at this book. I quite enjoyed it. It was well written, it kept me turning the pages, and overall it was a really good book. So let's jump into talking a bit about it. So we have two main characters. The first is Louise. She is a young woman during World War II. The second character is a woman named Kara, who's in the present day. She's, from what I'm guessing, probably early to mid-30s. She's recently divorced, going through a lot, and she works doing work with antique dealers. She'll go to estates, go through all of the furniture and the belongings in the house, see what's worth something, what isn't, and let the families know. It's during one of these expeditions that in a tin in a dresser she finds a diary that belongs to the aforementioned Louise. At first she doesn't know the woman's name. There's no name written on it, but on the back of a photograph that's in the journal, she sees the initials L.K. She brings the journal to the attention of the woman who is in charge of the estate, but she has literally zero interest in it. And that leads Kara to asking if she can keep the diary, and the woman's like, yeah, whatever, just get to work. So that kind of sets Kara off on this journey. We know that Kara's parents have passed away, and she lives now close to her grandmother, who she spends a lot of time with, as it's really her last living relative. And when she finds this diary, she really gets a feeling that she wants whoever owns the diary, if they're still alive or if they're not, their family members, to have this diary so that they can have a piece of their family, because kind of that connection to family is very important to her. So as Kara begins to read through the journal, we begin to get to know Louise. So not only are we getting to know Louise through the journal as Kara's reading it, we're also getting chapters from Louise's own point of view. So we learn that Louise was a young girl who lived in a small village in England. She was close friends with her cousin Kate, and Louise kind of viewed herself as a really plain, kind of homely girl. But we learned sort of from Kate's point of view that Kate doesn't believe that to be true at all. And if anything, Louise just kind of makes herself a little bit standoffish. And that's kind of what keeps suitors away. So Louise's mom has kind of made it up her mind that one of the young boys from the village who's been sent away to war, a boy named Gary, who before he went had taken Louise out to the movies once or twice, is going to be who Louise is going to marry. And Louise is really not feeling this at all. She hardly knows Gary, and what she does know, you know, he's fine, but not who she wants to marry. In fact, Louise has some fairly lofty goals and dreams. She wishes to be a teacher, maybe. She has dreams of going to university, of getting a degree in math, and from there maybe becoming a teacher. But for now, her parents have forbid it. She has to stay in this village and wait for Gary to come home, and she's not loving that. So one night, Kate manages to persuade Louise to go with her to a dance in a neighboring village where there will be soldiers. She convinces Louise to come. Louise gets all dolled up, and while they're there, she meets a soldier, and his name is Paul Bolton, and he's a pilot. They really hit it off. They spend the whole night talking. He even goes so far as to kissing her. And during the following days, they kind of sneak around the village together, because she tells him, like, we can't be seen in plain sight if we're going to be holding hands, and especially not if we're going to be kissing, because it's a small village and rumors fly, and My mother has it in her head that I'm going to marry this boy I have no interest in. So they kind of keep it on the down low. One day Louise goes home and finds Paul waiting for her inside her house with her parents. He's come by because he's running out of time. He's being shipped out right away and he couldn't bear to not see her. So he had to risk coming to her door. Her parents are very upset. They're very upset and they kind of forbid her from seeing him ever again. And Louise takes that time in sort of a spur of the moment. So Paul leaves, and then in a kind of spur of the moment decision, Louise, while she's alone in her room, she packs a bag, she leaves through the window, she goes to her cousin Kate's house and says to Kate, let's go join the military, because this was at the point where they were just starting to let women into the auxiliary. So her and Kate go. They kind of just leave through the cover of night, write their parents at a later date. They go and they take the aptitude test to find out where they're going to be stationed. Kate, I think, gets put on the telephones, and Louise tests very high, and so she's given a very special job, which is called, she's a gunner. And that was kind of the start of, if you've read about or seen any documentaries about the Gunner Girls, and they were the first women who were in charge of guns to shoot down planes. So interesting. They weren't allowed to actually make the shot, but they were up there and getting everything set up and ready. And at that point, it was completely unheard of for a woman to have such a job. Once she gets settled, she gets in touch with Paul and tells him what she's done. He writes back and he's kind of horrified. And he says, I wish you would stayed home. It is so dangerous. And she can understand where he's coming from. But at the same time, she's like, I needed to get out there and do something. Like, yeah, maybe you were a part of my decision to leave, but now that I'm here, it feels really good being a part of something bigger. Then meanwhile, we're flipping back and forth between Louise and Kara. We're seeing Louise get more and more wrapped up in this mystery, discovering who LK is. We know that she's, like I mentioned earlier, divorced. She's recently divorced. She's kind of still getting over it. It's only been a few months. And it was nasty. She had found out that her husband had been just lying to her throughout the entirety of their marriage. And he had had gambling problems and alcohol problems, and it was just an absolute mess. So she's kind of a wreck herself, a little bit. She's very not wanting to get involved with anybody. Understandably, it hasn't been long, and a relationship like that would no doubt take a toll on you mentally, emotionally. So when she meets her new next door neighbor, who's a handsome gentleman with a adorable dog, she's not interested. But as time goes by, they keep running into each other. She tells him about her interest in this project of kind of finding out who LK is, who the family is, and all that. He tells her, well, I'm a professor by trade, like that's my work, but I also have a lot of interest in antiques and different time periods and things like that. So she kind of enlists his help to help her discover, and it turns out that he's got some really good connections, and he gets a lot of information for her. Then back to Louise. Louise is out there and she's doing her thing. Her and Paul are fighting a bit in their letters. But then he'll change on a dime. He'll be rude to her in one letter and then apologetic and sweet to her in the next. And this is kind of raising a few red flags for her, but she keeps pushing them down because, she doesn't want to believe that he's anything but the Mr. Wonderful that she thinks he is. So eventually, after she hasn't heard from him for a while, and after the leave of absence that he was going to be taken supposedly got pushed back, he shows up at her door one day just unannounced out of the blue, and he asks her to marry him. And there's a part of her that wants to say no. There's a part of her that is not convinced that this is the right thing to do. But in the end, his enthusiasm is too much and there's a crowd standing around them. So she accepts his proposal, and then they're set to get married the next day before he has to ship out again. And they do. They get married, and there's a ceremony, and then there's a dinner. And during the dinner, one of his friends, a man named Reggie, is telling stories, and he's drinking. They're all drinking, and the more this Reggie guy drinks, the more outrageous his stories are getting. And then at one point, he's casually telling a story that doesn't even really have to do with Paul, and he's wondering about dates, and he says to Paul, like, when did we go to that movie when you had your 2-day leave? And Louise is like, your 2-day leave? I thought you didn't get a leave. And Paul's like, oh, don't listen to him. He's drunk. He's got the dates messed up. That was before I met you. But there's just something that doesn't sit right with that explanation with Louise. And rightly so. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get into the spoilers for anyone who wants to know how it ends. But if you don't want the spoilers and you're hearing this and you're thinking that sounds like a good story, I would 100% recommend. It's only about like 260, 280 pages. It's not a long read. You can get through it in a couple of evenings. And if you love reading about World War II, I think you'd really enjoy it. Like I said, there is the elements of romance in there, so if that's not your thing, maybe avoid it. But if you don't mind a bit of romance and a bit of mystery, I would totally recommend. So after their time together for the wedding, Paul has to go back to where he's stationed, and she has to get back to work. And she's writing him and he's not responding. Months go by, and then one day she gets a letter from one of the higher ups where he is stationed, and it's him returning her letters. And he says, you know, I thought I should let you know that Paul was killed back in November. His plane was shot down, but you know, he took a few Nazi planes with him, so hooray. And she's like, this is really weird that they're telling me in a letter. I'm his wife. Why aren't they delivering the telegram to me and telling me in person? So one of her friends has an uncle who's a higher up. And so that friend reaches out to her uncle and asks him to dig into it. Like, is it a clerical error? What the heck's going on? And so eventually Louise gets called into this man's office, and he says, listen, I've got to tell you something. And she says, what? And he says, he had a wife. He said, you know, I don't know what to tell you, and I'm sure this comes as a surprise, but whatever the wedding ceremony that you guys had, it held no legal weight. He already had a wife that he married before he enlisted into the war. Louise, of course, is completely taken aback. That day, she just walks right out the door, and she goes to the address that she had for Paul. While she's there, a woman comes in and says, I hear that you were married to my husband. And Louise is like, I'm so sorry. Like, I don't know what's going on. I'm so sorry this happened to you. And the woman, her name is Lenora, she's like, yeah, it's absolutely insane. She's like, you're not even the first one who's come as a widow of his. And Louise is like, what? And Lenora's like, yeah, you're the third girl that's shown up as a grieving widow of Paul's at my house. And Louise is she's just horrified. So eventually she leaves, and they leave on good terms. Lenora's kind of like, you know, if you need anyone to talk to, vent to, cry to, you can call me. I'm sorry, my husband was like this. I don't know why he was. I'm sorry. So it's nice that they're able to leave on good terms because they're both victims in his insanity. So then back to Kara. Kara manages to track down, with her handsome neighbor friend Liam's help, Kate, Louise's cousin. She is still alive. She's very old. She's, you know, definitely getting towards the end of her life, but she's agreed to meet with Kara and Liam and kind of fill in the gaps for the story. And she does, and they get to talk to her and learn more about Louise, and they learn that she went on to have a good life. She went to, after the war was over, She went to California, where she went to university and did get her math degree. And she met a man there. And then at the present time when Kara is talking to Kate, Kate says that Louise had passed away about 6 years prior. So Kara is able to sort of rest easy knowing that Louise, everything turned out okay for Louise, no matter how upsetting that must have been for her at the time. And Kara no doubt feels a kinship to Louise because, you know, Kara's husband was a liar and very troubled, just like Louise's fake husband had been. And then, yeah, it just kind of ends on a happy note, while sort of leaving us with the thought that Kara and Liam were probably going to end up together, and he seemed like a good fit for her. And her grandmother loved him as well, which is always important, isn't it? So once again, if you love World War II books with a bit of mystery and a bit of romance, would definitely recommend The Lights Over London. Such a pretty cover too. So yeah, let me know down in the comments below if you've read this book, or if you've read any other good books aside from The Nightingale and this one that take place during the World War II and really focus on the women and what was going on for them at the time, because that's so interesting to read about. I can't imagine what it would have been like living during that time. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you have a fantastic weekend, and I will see you guys on Monday. Bye.